Thanks everyone for coming. It's a great pleasure to introduce Tom Jenks, who's come to give us one of our discussion hour, slightly longer format talks today. Tom's pretty much a product of St Andrews, so PhD here on the dolphins, then a postdoc with bats, and then returning to the dolphins for this postdoctoral project, which is an interdisciplinary project also funded by the TWCF that fund the Diverse Intelligences Hub as well. So I think we're going to really enjoy hearing all about the project and about the work you've been doing. And we've got lots of time for discussion, so save up your questions and we should be able to have a good discussion afterwards.
Amazing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right. I just want to say thank you to everyone coming in person, online as well. Thank you to TWCF for funding the part of my PhD that actually collected this data. And obviously this project that we're working on now is a Joyful by Nature project. So we've got a group working on chimpanzees, which I will not be touching today, and Kia parrots as well. And we've been looking at play vocalizations and positive vocalizations and how we can actually assess that in animals. So today I'm going to be going a bit through my career trajectory, I suppose, just to kind of give a bit of context to this question of whether animals convey positive emotional states to each other, and also to give a bit of background of how we're approaching this question from within the project as well. So with that, we can get started. Hello. All right. So the trait that I've focused on mostly in my career so far is always centered around vocal learning. So there are a few different working definitions for this. The one that I've stuck with is vocal learning refers to the process whereby species can modify vocalizations within their natural repertoire through experience with other individuals, and they can also gain novel vocalizations as well. Now, vocal learning is often split up into a few different umbrellas, one of them being contextual learning, and this is the ability of an animal to produce a known sound in a new context, right? So a signaler produces a known sound to convey a new meaning in a known context. And for that to even make sense, or to make sense to another, a receiver has to be able to understand the meaning of that known sound in a new context, right? Otherwise, you're just shouting into the void. Now, we actually experience this quite a lot in our day-to-day lives. I know they're spelt differently, so linguists don't come at me, but to see and the see, right? Completely the same pronunciation, but different meanings. And English is a hot mess. So we also have more abstract meanings from it as well. I don't envy having to learn English as a non-native speaker. The other part of vocal learning that we look on quite a lot, and this is probably the more sexy part, I suppose, of vocal learning, is production learning. And that's the ability to acquire novel vocalizations outside of your innate repertoire. And this can happen through two main mechanisms. Firstly, convergence. So this is what happens in human language, right? As we're young, we pick up on audio templates from around us, and those are the sounds we start to repeat and associate with meaning. So that's why we have all of our different languages. And if you're from where I am, everyone speaks like this. So we have accents too. The other part of that is divergence. So in a species like dolphins, for example, that communicate a lot with whistles, they don't confer voice cues. So just by hearing someone whistle, you don't actually know who's communicating with you. So they, when they're young, they'll produce whistles that sound like those around them, and then they'll diverge away from that template to form signature whistles, so they can broadcast identity information as well, so we know who's vocalizing. Now, vocal production learning is a great avenue for comparative research because we see it across a wide array of unrelated taxa and a spectrum of ability. So you have your 3 clades of birds here, 5 clades of mammals as well. So as humans, it's a great picture I've chosen for myself, and that was, don't know why I did that. We're considered open-ended vocal learners, right? So through our entire lifespan, we theoretically should be able to acquire novel vocalizations even into as we get older. That is becoming increasingly more difficult with Gen Z slang. So yeah, That's an interesting one. Parrots are also open-ended vocal learners. They can acquire new vocalizations throughout their entire lives as well, as opposed to songbirds who have a sensitivity period. They acquire song within that period, and after that it crystallizes. They can chop and change moments around, but typically they're stuck within that sensitivity period. Now, there are of course exceptions to this, and this is a spectrum, but that is general rules. However, vocal learning isn't the only thing to control our vocal output. Another thing that greatly impacts it is emotion, right? So in our learned vocalizations, such as language, we have really strong control over when we produce that. I can stand here, be silent for the next 50 minutes. Pretty awkward, but I could do it. However, our control over our learned vocalizations declines with emotion, right? I'm sure we've all experienced that. As arousal increases, sometimes we find it harder to control emotion or how it sounds. Our control over learned vocalizations also declines with such stuff as age-related disease and developmental disorders as well. The other category of vocalizations we have are innate or affectively driven ones, such as crying, laughter, shrieking, all three at once if you're unlucky enough. But these are all tied to core emotions, right? Sadness, happiness, fearfulness, perhaps. And so it spawned the hypothesis that perhaps we have two different mechanisms controlling the onset of these vocalizations. Now, the first in writing example I can find of this is from the 20s, but they quote that it's been going around since the late 1800s. So there is this hypothesis. We have different pathways in the brain controlling learned or emotional vocalizations per se. That spawned a wealth of research in the 20th century, even recently as well, exploring this, spearheaded mostly by Hans Kuipers in the 50s and Uwe Jürgens a bit more recently than that. Became known as the Kuipers-Jürgens hypothesis, that we have direct connections from the motor cortex directly projecting into the nucleus ambiguus in the brainstem to control learned vocalizations. And then we have people like Christina Simonyan looking for this in primates, Peter Cook looking for this in seals. Does really great research on this. And one of the more prominent examples we have of this comes from a paper by Hopf et al. In 1992. They conducted experiments with stroke patients who had sustained damage to their descending pathways from the motor cortex thought to be involved in speech and facial expressions, right? Those two things are interlinked. And they found that when their patients were instructed to smile or frown, they couldn't do so, or at least to the extent that they could do before. However, when they were genuinely happy or sad, they smiled and frowned typically, right? So this became another further support for this kind of hypothesis. I'm going to steal some figures from Eric Jarvis's 2019 paper on this because I think it demonstrates it really well. If you're interested in vocal learning, go check this paper out as well. It's great. So here we have a human brain, and we have different brain structures related to speech production, comprehension, all speech things really. And we find here that we have a direct connection from the laryngeal motor cortex, both the dorsal and ventral, into the nucleus ambiguus, which is in the brainstem. And then we also have an indirect connection as well, which veers the way of the periaqueductal gray and then carries on to the nucleus ambiguus. When we look at other vocal learning species, such as birds, we find the same pattern. Now, there will always be people who argue that these aren't truly homologous because birds have a syrinx rather than a larynx, and they're a bird brain rather than a mammal brain, but I think we could ignore those for now. And then when we look at primates, so one of our closest relatives, they're non-vocal learners, we find that they actually only have indirect connections. And so for the longest time outside of human speech production, it was thought that animals produce sounds purely affectively. When this kind of stuff came along, people are like, okay, well maybe vocal learners control the onset of vocalizations, but everyone else is only producing vocalizations as an emotional response. I don't think that's true. We'll figure out why, but I think this is a good kind of divergence to actually explore what we mean by emotion. So typically and historically, we think about emotion as a discrete subjective experience. And that we speak about it when we're speaking to each other. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm stressed. You can be in all three, but you are in these discrete bins, right? Panksepp, Ekman, and Boyce argued that basic emotions are rooted to serve adaptive functions. And they're typically of the opinion, if you're a discrete theorist, that a stimulus or an event will put us into an emotive state, and then that has knock-on consequences. We have the subjective feeling, non-verbal signals such as voice cues or facial cues. However, for as long as this approach has been around, people have argued or asked whether it's actually fair that we use these emotive terms when we're exploring it scientifically. Because if they're in our questions, will we find them in our answers? On top of that, if you've ever spoken to a German, they have a word for absolutely everything that we just kind of try and mash together in English. And people from Japanese cultures often report emotions that we don't even think about in the Western world as well. So actually using these kind of lay terms, I suppose, holds us back in a way. Then we come on to dimensional theorists, kind of started around 2003 with this paper from James Russell. And he suggested that emotion was this kind of subjective experience of a multi-dimensional nature that could be mapped onto two-dimensional axes of displeasure to pleasure, you've got on the x-axis here, and deactivation to activation on the y-axis. And this was built upon two foundational primitives. It was designed to describe emotion in its most basic form and get away from these charged labels. He has put some on there, I imagine, to dissuade the discrete theorists of the time as he was introducing this, but he does not use any of the core emotions that were around at the time. So his first primitive was something called core affect. This is a consciously or neurophysiological state that is consciously accessible as a simple, non-reflective feeling that is an integral blend of displeasure or pleasure and activation. And essentially, at any given time, you should be able to introspectively assess how you are feeling and map it onto these axes at some point. The second part is that each stimulus has an affective quality. That is, it has the ability to change your core affect, and even through perceiving it, it will come in effectively coded. Importantly, Russell argued that actually it's several different components, such as your current core affect, how you perceive the effect, an object or stimulus, how you attribute to an object, you appraise it, and they all combine to form this prototype of a specific emotion that we label. And as you'll see, it's the complete opposite of what we see in the discrete view. Now, of course, this is all in reference to human emotional experience, where the gold standard is verbal or written self-reports, right? You take someone, you put them voluntarily in a situation, and then you ask them how they felt about it afterwards. We cannot do that with animals. So we then come on to one of my favorite papers I found during the PhD from Mendel, Berman, and Paul, who aim to integrate the discrete and dimensional theories for a functional approach to studying animal emotion. Now, I'll say that their goal here is not to solve what emotion is from the human perspective, just provide a framework that allows us to study it in animals in a more subjective manner. So they took the axes of core affect and just changed the terms from negative to positive valence and low to high arousal. And what's important in this advancement is the introduction of the reward acquisition system and the punishment avoidance system, which is represented by these arrows here. And this is essentially saying that all stimuli are inherently rewarding or punishing, and in some form at least, right? And responses to stimuli would have evolved over evolutionary time to maximize the acquisition of fitness-enhancing rewards and minimize exposure to fitness-threatening punishers. For example, if we're sat down in Q2, we're feeling pretty calm and relaxed, suddenly a bear jumps out, we're going to be shot up into Q4 where we're fearful and anxious, and we're going to run away, and that's going to avoid the punishment of being eaten if we can run quicker than our friend. Right? So that's kind of the theory that it's going on. And this really operationalized the study of emotion because it says that core affect then is functionally related to the animal's experience of the success or failure of acquiring rewards and avoiding punishment. So if we can put animals in a situation where they get a reward or they don't, we're able to then measure and relate that to core affect. So that's this ever-changing position on these axes, and they went further to be like, well, a mood then is a mean of an individual's cumulative position in core affect. I won't go into that today, but if people are interested in mood, this is the place to start. So we then start to ask, do other species convey affective states? And I think anyone who's met an animal or has a pet or has worked with animals would say, yes, they do, right? We can think of a dog baring its teeth when it's angry, whimpering when it's hurt, putting its hackles up when it's scared. AI didn't really know what to do with that prompt, but it tried its best. So these are signals which convey negative affective states. They're generally easier to interpret, or we've conditioned ourselves to believe that they are. And this is where emotional research has focused on for the most part, right? So there's quite a widespread acceptance that animals experience negative emotional states, less so when it comes to positive ones. Though if anyone works in welfare and such like that, you'll know that is changing, especially in the world of vertebrates, less so in other taxa, and even less so when it comes to that, they're conveying that information vocally to each other, right? So that's kind of where we're approaching this from. I realize that's a bit of a preamble, but I think an important one when we're speaking about things to kind of get everyone on the same page, which you may or may not agree with. We'll come to the questions at the end on that one. So why dolphin vocalizations if that's something that we want to study? Dolphins are highly social, open-ended vocal production learners. It's not unreasonable to assume that social species are most likely to use overt signals to communicate affective state, right? Just like we do. Vocalizations importantly allow for the non-invasive collection of data at a distance. If a dolphin, especially one in captivity, knows you're there and you might have fish, it ain't going nowhere, right? So being able to collect data from a distance is really important. And if vocalizations are affected by inner state, they're likely to be one of the first indications, and that's certainly true for humans. So dolphins produce a wide range of vocalizations, and we typically look at these on spectrograms. For those who are not used to spectrograms, you're going to be in for a ride. So we have time on the x-axis and frequency on the y-axis, and where the brightness of these signals are, it indicates a higher perceived amplitude, right? We can also look at these directly as waveforms, where again you have time on the x-axis and amplitude directly on the y-axis. And you should see here that where brightness is on the spectrogram, you see a wider range on the waveform, right? And the waveform is literally just a pure measurement of sound pressure waves. So I'm going to take you through the three main vocal categories that we see in dolphins, and it's important to understand that these are not call types per se. I know when we're looking at other animals and humans even, we'll categorize different call types, but dolphins, the history of studying dolphin vocalizations, we started with whistles because they were easier and we found lots of different whistle types. And then we moved on to clicks and burst pulses. So we have this higher order category where they have 2, maybe 3 different production mechanisms, which each have their own call types. And if you're unfortunate enough, they'll produce a few at the same time. Really makes classification a pain. So clicks or click trains, probably everyone has heard about echolocation clicks, perhaps. We define these as pulses with an instantaneous front and broadband. Broadband because they cover a wide band of frequencies, and instantaneous because each of these will really be microseconds long or even shorter, right? So dolphins will produce a singular or a series of clicks fairly often. Echolocation is the primary reason, at least in bottlenose dolphins. However, we know that other cetacean species will produce clicks only and they won't produce any whistles. So sperm whales, quite a famous example of this, and they produce codas, which are stereotyped vocal sequences or click sequences. So hopefully the audio works, so we can hear this. This is actually a dolphin vocalizing in air. Whistles, the more famous dolphin vocalization, we define them as tonal narrowband vocalizations because at any given time they only take up a singular or very few frequencies. And with this method of sound production, we have multiple different types. But I'll see if we can listen to it first. Nope, you get the definition. This is actually Candy's signature whistle. It's her unique identifying whistle that she broadcasts. But we could also make the argument that this sequence of whistles is made up of different whistle types. Oh no. Hey. And we typically determine whistle type by looking at its shape on a spectrogram. So we can argue that this has a little upsweeping whistle here, then all of these ones in the middle are little U-shaped whistles we'd probably categorize together, and then you got this real freaky one at the end, which is like a flat with an ending downsweep. And this is how we typically categorize whistles on a spectrogram, because we know that dolphins listening to computer-generated whistles can copy them, right? And we know that this relates to how they hear, right? So that's why we take it as a biologically relevant way to categorize whistles, right? And when you stare at them long enough, you can kind of imagine how they're going to sound just by looking at them long enough. Now, the last type of vocalization that we'll be focusing on today for the most part are burst pulses. Now, these are vocalizations which maybe people haven't heard of a lot, and that generally comes down to the fact that people don't really know how to study them. There's still no consensus on that, so there's less information out there. Burst pulses appear on a spectrogram as this kind of banded harmonic structure. And we'll just give a listen to a few because they are weird little things. So the burst pulse is that sound in the middle. So you got clicks, then you got the burst pulse, then you got some more clicks. We'll try again. Kind of sounds like a creaky door, right? This one is crazy. It's got a little whistle in the background too. And then this one is essentially you got the dolphin right on the hydrophone making a burst pulse sound. Here it's clipping out over there. So these have historically been categorized by ear. And you just kind of go, oh, that sounds like a buzz to me. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. The problem is that's quite subjective. And between labs across the world, they came up with their own names for them. So what I call a buzz, you might call a bark. So it's not the most useful of conventions. And these are actually click trains, which makes it even more confusing. Our temporal resolution within auditory perception isn't good enough to perceive these as individual clicks. And even on spectrograms, when we look at them, they don't appear that way. So we define these as a series of clicks with an interclick interval of less than 0.004 seconds. So it's tiny. And depending on your frequency or spectrogram resolutions, they'll appear with this banded structure. And we can actually get at the different clicks there if we zoom in on a little part here. On the waveform at the top, you can see each of the click peaks in the amplitude spectrum there. So yeah, they come in a massive variety, or so it seems, that enough that people try and categorize them by ear. Some people take it upon themselves to measure the distance between each click, but there's thousands in each call, so that takes absolutely eons. so hasn't particularly caught on. So we'll come back to my solution to this later. I just want to pop back to usage learning quickly, because in understanding whether us or dolphins vocalize according to their internal state, we have Stefan Hager introduced another way of thinking about this that no one had really considered before. So it was assumed that if you're a usage learner, you're pretty consistent throughout your entire lives. And the way that they test this, so they had 2 rhesus macaques. They got them to hold a bar to indicate they were ready for the task to start. And on a screen, they were shown this white square. 1 to 5 seconds later, 80% of the time it changed to a red square and they had to produce a vocal cue. And 20% of the time it stayed white and they had to remain silent. What we see here, so these 2 graphs on the left respond to monkey C, and 2 graphs on the right respond to monkey T. The top graphs are just raw numbers, and the bottom graphs are just percentage hit rates, right? So they display the same information. What we find in the white area, so further to the left, we've got age on the x-axis, sorry, from 5 to 9 years old, is before the age of sexual maturity, so around, or adulthood, around 6 years old. They're pretty okay at this task. Pretty good even, they pass with significance. However, as they get older, they become progressively worse and worse and worse at this task. It's one of the few papers that actually shows that with age, a performance of a motor behavior declines. And this hadn't really been considered before. Interestingly, they had the idea of, okay, well, is it just they can't respond to any motor behavior? In blue, on the right-hand side there, at around 9 years old, they got them to perform a motor behavior where they just pulled the bar instead of producing a vocal behavior, and that they smashed. So this only really relates to controlling the onset of vocal utterances. So even though we don't expect this to happen in a vocal learner, I thought it would be remiss to actually test that. And usage learning hasn't been looked at in dolphins before, just assumed because you go to enough dolphinariums, you see them vocalizing on cue. But I wanted to test that anyway. So I headed to Ultramare Marine Park in Italy. Great place to do field work. And these are the dolphins we had, 5 male, 2 female. And so we set about our own usage study. For this study, we only had the 5 females as we were using the 2 males for something else. And our setup was very similar to the rhesus macaques. Or they'll be so scared of it they won't come near it. So we kind of had to hide the hydrophone in this tube. You can see in the gate. We'd sandwich it between another gate so they couldn't come in and tear it out. But because of the restriction of only being able to place them between pools, it meant we couldn't localize to an individual that was producing the vocalization. So all we could do was vocalize to a pool. And so for that reason, we only included behaviors where every dolphin in the pool was doing the same behavior at the same time, right? That led to a fairly restricted ethogram where we had quite a few different behavioral categories, and I placed them into affective ratings of play, positive non-play, neutral, and agonistic scenarios. And if you're wondering what play in a dolphin looks like, I've got a couple of videos here. So this is Blue swimming around one of the back pools. She has a buoy, and she's doing the dolphin equivalent of catching it, I suppose. So we labeled this as object play. They'll do this quite a lot. And they're pretty good at it. They're often given volleyballs as well that they'll do the same with, so it kind of looks like they're dribbling basketballs as they swim around. In this video, we've got a couple of interesting things going on. So it may be quite hard to see. We've got what we call the kraken, is a buoy, and then from it you've got loads of like tentacle-like arms hanging down that the dolphins can come and interact with and pull it around. And you'll see the two dolphins nearest the front. They are interacting with the toy and pulling that around. And if you can see it, right at the back in the middle, there's another dolphin who starts blowing bubbles to disrupt the reflection in the surface, perhaps. It's hard to actually say what she's doing. Maybe she's just playing with bubbles and likes it. But we've got two different forms of object play going on in the pool at the same time here. And then the dolphins also like to make my life difficult by dragging half of it into the other side. And you have one playing on one playing on another. They're both tugging it in different directions, just being all-round menaces. So I sat on top of that rock for 53 hours watching these guys. In that time, there was only 104 occurrences of only one behavior happening in a pool. So lots more data to look through for other things here. In 83 of those, I was confident of the localization, right? It can be hard sometimes with the cement pools. You get a lot of echoes and such. So we only included ones where we were absolutely certain the vocalizations were coming from where we expected. That gave us 1,811 burst pulse vocalizations to analyze. But then one problem, or at least it caused a problem for modeling we had, was a very uneven sampling effort. So in the play context, we had 470 minutes of sampling effort here. In the positive, it was just 41 minutes. In neutral, it was 331 minutes. And the agonistic context was just 19.5. So this isn't taken out of the 53 hours. This is just taken out of the 83 events that we have. Now, I presented this at the Comparative Cognition Conference a few weeks ago. And I actually had someone come and say, while it might be annoying for your modeling that you had this disparity, this is actually quite representative of what they see in terms of ratios of different contexts in the wild and in their facility as well. So it's a pain, but a good one, it seems. But we'll come on to how we resolve that in the modeling in a bit, because that's a fun one. So we come back to the issue of how do we reliably categorize burst pulses? I didn't want to do it by ear. PhD timeline doesn't always allow for that either, because there was a lot to go through. And I was wondering, we do have these harmonic bands here. Is there a way that we can use the shape to more subjectively categorize these calls? Thankfully, William A. Watkins, my hero, 1968, found that these these banded structures relate to the interclick interval. So where you have an increase in banded structure here, you have an increase in call rate. So an increase in the clicks, sorry. And then vice versa for a decreasing one too. So actually, what you're seeing here in this banded structure is an increase in clicks and then a decrease in clicks, which we know the dolphins can perceive. Their audio resolution is much better than ours. So what we did is we looked for the banded structure that had a starting frequency of around 10 kilohertz. We traced them. That was a lot of fun. You do start to hate spectrograms at the end of the day. And then we generally categorize them according to shape of changes of more than 1 kilohertz. Now, it's important that we start at 10 kilohertz for all of them, because the way that harmonic ratios work, if we started at 20 kilohertz, for example, that slope will be twice as steep. So if we're looking for changes of 1 kilohertz, we have to start in the same place. We identified 6 stereotyped calls. I creatively named them decreasing, flat, up, down, increasing, down, up, and wavy. Wavy just being more than 1 or 2 inflection points. You could, in future, theoretically subdivide that even further. I'm sure the dolphins have the capacity to understand that. But the model was already getting pretty intense by this point. We also have an other category, which is where we could see a vocalization happen. We could see the banded structure, but there wasn't a clear harmonic to trace at 10 kilohertz. The reason why we've kept that in is to account for the different number of individuals across events. We calculated call rate. So in order to accurately look at that, we needed to include all vocalizations we saw, even if we couldn't categorize them. I subjected some students and my fellow PhD colleagues to a inter-observer reliability test, which we got substantial agreement on, which was great, thankfully. So the first thing we looked at was duration. So you've got burst pulse duration on the y-axis, and then the different contexts on the x-axis. And we used a generalized linear mixed model controlling for the number of individuals there and the specific grouping of individuals as well. We found that calls in the agonistic context were significantly shorter than those in all other contexts. That's somewhat interesting. It's not what we always find in terrestrial mammals and birds, except when it's the same call being produced across different contexts. We found that calls in the play context were significantly shorter than those in the positive non-play context. And I think we can assume that play is sometimes higher on the arousal spectrum as well as the agonistic context is. So we see that as duration decreases, arousal increases. And we see similar patterns in ourselves and other mammals as well. So as I said, we calculated call rate here and wanted to see how it changed across contexts. But we calculated call rate as the number of calls per individual per minute. 1, because we have a disparity in sampling effort across contexts, and 2, because 5 dolphins producing 10 calls is not the same as 1 dolphin producing 10 calls, right? So we wanted to be able to capture that. So here again, you've got the different contexts on the x-axis and then that call rate on the y-axis. And we found, using a generalized additive model, accounting for the number of individuals present again, that the neutral context had a significantly lower call rate compared to all other contexts, and then there was no difference between those. I don't think that's too surprising to anyone. Low arousal, lower call rates, nothing new there. Would have been interesting if it was the other way around, actually. So that's good. However, the main question is, how do each of these call types relate or contribute to this? So here we have the same plot, but this time each color represents a different call type. Now, to get at this, other than going, oh yeah, the flat looks like it's got a higher call type, this is where the modeling gets pretty funky. This took a while to sort out, but we got there in the end. We applied a generalized linear mixed model on the call count, and then we applied an offset of the number of individuals and event duration, meaning that call rate was calculated within the model as we had previously defined it. This found that there were significantly different call rates between the contexts of the different calls. So we used call type specific models derived from the global model to evaluate where these differences lie, using estimated marginal means for pairwise comparisons across the different contexts and adjusting for multiple comparisons. We found that this increasing call type had a significantly higher call rate in the play context compared to positive and neutral, suggesting its use as a play-specific burst pulse call. Now, despite a large raw difference to the agonistic context, we don't find a significant difference there. I'll come back to that in a second. We found the up-down call type had no difference between the play and positive non-play context, suggesting its use as a generally positive associated call, and they were both significantly higher than the neutral context. We found the flat call type had a higher call rate in the play and agonistic contexts, suggesting it is linked to higher arousal, and then a similar pattern for the decreasing call type too. However, as I said, despite the increasing call type having a really large raw difference compared to the agonistic without having a significant difference, the same for the up-down call type too, we had to question, is this an artifact of the disparity in sampling effort we have? And would this hold up if we downsampled the play context to 20 minutes? So we employed a Monte Carlo exact randomization test where we took the 470 minutes of play context, we split it into we split each minute and randomly sampled 20 of them. For each minute, I calculated the call rate within that. I had to do it separately for each minute because each one has a different number of individuals contributing to the call seen in that one. And then I took the mean for that 20-minute and I compared it to the mean we had for the agonistic. But then I was like, well, what if this is just a fluke? So I did it again with a different 20. And then I kept doing that until I couldn't do it anymore with the 470 minutes, right? You can do that 20 times. And then I repeated that process 1,000 times, so we have a distribution. So I really wanted to make sure what was going on here holds up. And then we can plot that distribution. So on the x-axis here, we have the call rate, and this is a histogram. So the y-axis is just the number of times we see certain call rates out of that. The blue histogram here is the increasing call rate in the play context, and the orange line is in the agonistic context. So we see at no point does it come anywhere near, does it even overlap, which is great. So we have a significant difference in call rate there, and that is supported through this distribution. We then repeated that for the up-down call type as well. That was the other one where we saw a massive disparity. However, this only had 40 minutes of sampling in the positive context, so that was only resampled twice, but the play was resampled 20 times and repeated 1,000 times. So, exact randomization tests show that the call rate was always higher than the agonistic context, that it is a significant difference there, which is fantastic. And it shows that the results we were seeing are not artifacts of this sampling difference that we had, which again is great because we did, as we were told, it was representative of other facilities and the wild as well. So, as a quick recap, we find that burst pulse call durations do significantly change between different affective contexts. We find the call rates and the call use of different burst pulse call types are significantly different for some of them. We find this increasing call type is associated with play contexts. This up-down call type is generally associated with more positive contexts. And this decreasing and flat call type are more linked to arousal. On top of that, now I'm not saying this is the only way to categorize burst pulses and this is the end-all be-all, but I do think we've developed a system here that was a lot more subjective than anything we've had before and is a lot less time consuming than measuring every single click position in time, because I tried that and it was not for me. So yeah, that's kind of it. I just want to thank everyone again for having me here, Templeton for funding it, the Verse Intelligence group for inviting me to speak. Sarah, you did a lot of admin in the back there, so thank you for sorting that out. And Ultramare as well for having us play with their dolphins.
I think we've got plenty of time for questions. Does anyone want to grab a small coffee or nibble? If you do, just help yourself. Don't be shy. Obviously, we can all watch you, but that's fine. Do you want to share your own questions, or shall I field for you?
Oh, no, yeah, I can go for it. Questions, anyone? I might need help if there's people online, though. Yeah, I can't see that.
There is one, but...
Okay, let's alternate then. We'll take one in the room. Giuseppe's keen and ready to go, and then we'll take the one online, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
No.
I was wondering whether, do you know if there is any way to measure physiologically valence? I mean, you presented arousal and valence, that's great. We know how to measure arousal.
Yeah.
Do you know any way of measuring valence?
I mean, it's difficult, right? People do physiological measurements in terms of like stress levels, right? And dopamine we relate to valence.
But that's not valence. It's arousal.
It is arousal. I guess it has ties to valence.
Well, but you can be aroused positively or negatively.
Yeah, that's true. It's one of those difficult ones where I do not venture more into like the physiological processes. So I am unsure of the direct ways to get at valence. Okay. And I think that's where a lot of the field sits, because it is such a subjective thing. Getting physiological measurements from cetaceans as well is much more tricky than other animals as well. We've tried to get real-time stuff. Urine samples is one way to do it, but then you have to get the dolphins over because you can't just go scoop up the water. So then that doesn't have, you're changing their behavior on the way then. You don't know what correlates that might have. People do try and do blood in real time, but they're not too reliable, and I can't imagine any dolphinarium allowing you to attach those to the animals themselves. Yeah.
Sorry to be insisting on this.
Yeah.
Those, yes, will give you arousal.
Yeah.
But I don't think they'll give you valence.
No.
Right.
I don't know.
What do you think about judgment biases? Could that give you?
Physiologically.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. People do the optimism tests with them as well, but we didn't do that with these guys here.
Thank you.
There's two online now. So first is from Tom Smulders. Very simple question. He says, and sorry that I missed it, what was the positive non-play context again?
So that was all kind of positive contexts we had that weren't play. So originally they were lumped together. So we had fin contact, we had synchronized swimming. Those were the main two that we included because we knew from Dudzinski's work and from Clegg's work that those are signs of positive and affiliative context in dolphins. Yeah.
I have two questions. Thank you very much for the talk. The first one, I might have missed it, but is there a reason why you decided to go with the burst pulses when trying to categorize them as opposed to the other forms of vocalization for the dolphins?
Yeah, so clicks we know are sensory. So if you're seeing an individual, well, you can resolve the individual clicks. We didn't want to include those because whilst they might use them for communication, we can't rule out they're not just echolocation clicks. Whistles, I ran a whistle analysis and I got 127 different call types. Models aren't built for that, at least the ones that we were doing. So we are trying that, and that will come out. But what we thought was kind of important here was not only are we showing that we can subjectively pull out different burst pulse call types, but also they're correlated to specific contexts. Previous to this, people have said burst pulses are purely aggressive signals. They only come out when they're stressed. Other people say they only see them in positive contexts. So this is the reason why we wanted to go down this route. And it's not to say that the dolphins go, I'm only going to use burst pulses here, because they don't. They use a mixture, and I doubt they even think of them as separately as we do, right? Or perceive them differently. There are people who even argue they're on the same spectrum. You know, if you whistle with your mouth and keep tightening the pressure, it'll turn into a raspberry, right? We're unsure how they actually perceive their spectrum of vocalizations, but we wanted to get this kind of consistent, hopefully more objective method out there as well. Yeah.
My other question, thank you. My other question, maybe a bit more asking for speculation on your part. I don't know if you're planning to do it, but do you think that these vocalizations from one individual could influence the emotional state of another individual? Like if one dolphin is vocalizing because they're feeling happy or they're feeling content, that could influence another individual to be feeling in that same way?
I would imagine so. Let's err on the side of speculation for the record. But I would imagine so, right? We vocalize, you could argue a signal, well, some definitions of a signal, right, are to change the interpretation or thinking of a receiver, right? There's no reason why that can't be true for an emotionally derived signal as well. If you hear someone and they're really happy and they happen to be speaking in a higher pitched voice, you might perceive that, whether that's their intention or not. Humans are emotional animals, right? We, as much as we like to not think we are and try and remove emotion from a lot of decisions, they do influence it. It wouldn't surprise me at all that other animals are biologically coded the same way. We're not quite there yet to say that is the case. And maybe we never will be, right? Because we can't even describe the subjective experience of another human. So trying to do that for animals is, let's say, scientifically dangerous. But if I was self-speculating, I would assume so. And it also has advantageous connotations in terms of if I see a predator and I scream and I instantaneously convey that sense of danger to others, even though they haven't seen it, alarm calls are typically more, contain more nonlinear vocal phenomena, right? To convey that. So there is also a fitness benefit argument for some of that too.
Yeah, I'll take the chair's privilege just to briefly follow up on that question. Did you see any difference in the length of the play bouts, if there was or there was not vocalization? Or was that always vocalization? Because one thing you could imagine in terms of the function is just signaling I'm having a good time, this is a successful play bout, and that it's more likely to continue.
That's something I'd like to look into. I didn't look at the duration of the play bouts to account for that. But actually, that could be quite an interesting thing to look at. The model was already getting so complicated that I think adding in too many more things would have led to failed convergences. And even if it converged out of tolerance for what we wanted.
Your call types could diverge within play, because they still do it all within play, right?
Exactly.
So if you have more of the positive ones, is that a longer play bout, and more of the...
I'd also like to look at self-object play versus playing with others in the same pool. That kind of thing as well. We view them as social animals, but we also anthropomorphize a lot, right? So, yeah.
Right, suddenly there were loads of questions. Should we take the one that was online, and then Emily and Manon?
Yes, there are two more online. So for the first one, from Esther Matrai, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced. Great talk. I would like to ask, what was the difference in ICI for the different call types?
So we used our... so when you put so many animations in, you kick your... Let me pull it up. Oh, there we go. In order to not have to do that, to save myself time, that's why we traced them. So we don't have ICI measurements. All we have here is that this call on the left, this up-down call, increases in call rate, so the ICI gets shorter and then decreases over the duration of the call. Now, I'm pretty sure that the call rate or click rate is also relevant to the space between the banded structure. So if you see this middle call, the increasing one, there's some dark patterns between each of the bands, whereas in this wavy one, there's a lot less of that. So I think that means the wavy, in this instance, has a much higher interclick interval, as well as the variation is shown in the banding structure itself. That's something we need to do a bit more simulation on. Watkins didn't describe that so much. I did not have the time in my PhD to look at each ICI. So this is the route we went for that. So I can't give you that, I'm afraid.
It's going to be a naive question.
Yeah.
If you had 6 humans in an enclosure,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and you were looking at their language, they would all have come from different places, they would have different accents, they might have different first languages, they would misunderstand each other, they would, I don't know, we wouldn't know where they all came from.
Yeah.
And all of these things would mean that they were not particularly representative, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
What do you know about your dolphins, I suppose?
So a couple of our dolphins were captive born, a couple are wild caught. So Pele, who's 58, she was from Cuba, but caught way back when people still thought that was okay. So she's bounced around like a fair bit. Interestingly, there was another paper done at this facility where they had a Risso's dolphin cohabituating, and her call types actually started sounding more and more like a bottlenose dolphin call over time. So there's a paper on Mary the dolphin. This was at the same facility. Really good one to go check out. But no, we don't, right? They're vocal learners at the end of the day. We don't know if this is just this facility only. And so that would be such a cool next step to go and check out are these universals, right? the one thing we have about human vocalizations is crying and laughter universally symbolize sadness and happiness, right? Because people can't control them as much. We don't know, we expect there to be universals in other vocal learning species, because we see universals in non-vocal learning species, right? But we don't know how far the runaway effect is here. These are essentially individuals that have been in isolation for up to 58 years, so they might have just formed their own vocal learning tangent, right? But that would be a great thing to look at. I'd love that for that to be a next step, because then if we find that actually it is, then we can start going, okay, does this apply to the wild? And can you start doing passive acoustic monitoring welfare of wild individuals, right? That would be a great kind of follow-on from this. But no, we don't. We don't know how representative it is. But it was at least highly stereotyped or consistent within this population of 7 individuals. Yeah.
Really interesting, thank you.
No, thank you. Is there an online question?
Yeah, Carrie Figdor, again, hope I pronounced that correctly. Could you be more explicit about the relation between the finding of burst call type differences in different neutral, negative contexts, positive, neutral, negative contexts, and the issues of vocal control and vocal control changing with emotion expression?
So, I'm not sure I understand the question perfectly, but to reiterate, so we had this call type, which we found significantly more in play compared to all of the others, the increasing one. We had this call type, which was found significantly more in play and positive non-play. So we think it's more of a just a generally positively associated call. And then the flat and decreasing call type, we think are linked to higher arousal because we see them more in play and agonistic contexts. Now, I think your question there then moves on to, given vocalizations can change with higher arousal and emotive states, is that what's controlling this? I'm going to assume that's your question, sorry. Yeah, you're right. That is definitely a thing and happens in humans as well. Yes? Okay, cool. Yeah, that is definitely something that we have to consider. And the usage learning bit wasn't to say, oh, this proves that they are doing all of this because they choose to. And they're like, oh, I'm in play, so I'm going to choose to let everyone know that I'm in play. That's not what the combination of the two studies was trying to say, but more that let's rule out the fact that everything is emotively driven as a vocalization, and then let's explore across different emotive contexts what vocalizations do come out. Apart from that, though, yeah, it's not really possible to say that these are chosen to be produced. I'll avoid the word intentional with primatologists in the room. Yeah, so I think especially my prediction would be, if I were allowed to speculate again, the flat and decreasing call types, since they're linked to arousal, would be my favorites for emotively driven ones. And then the other ones, but play again is a high arousal positive context, right? We see in chimpanzees as well, laughter vocalizations come out, right? The same in humans, we don't particularly control that. So perhaps they are also emotively driven, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, it was Manon. I skipped you there. That's right, you started, you go for it. What? No, you're good.
Might it be that the ratios matter? So that if you had a playback experiment,
Yeah.
you could play back the ratio of these calls to occurring with each other.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you hear a child shriek once, you have no idea whether it's terrified
Yeah.
or whether it's shrieking in joy.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to look at. In order to do that properly, what I'd really like to do is get at these other bins, because I'm sure, let's say most of those are flat, then it slightly changes what the ratio is, right? And to do that, you'd kind of need to put a tag on the animal, which you can do. They're not the biggest fan of in facilities a lot of the time, because they're not used to that and they go through a training. No, I mean, neither are wild ones, obviously. But at least you have an easy way to observe them. So yeah, that would be cool. And I think had we were able to put hydrophones in the pool and we just focused on a singular pool, we might be get better resolution on that front. But yeah, that would be a great thing to look at. Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I think it's not a very well formulated question, I apologise.
That's all right.
But, so I'm still thinking about the experiment you showed us with the stroke patients.
Yeah.
So there seems to be some vocalizations which are tightly linked to emotions, right?
Yeah.
Whereas others are influenced by emotions, but it's not like one-to-one.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so I was wondering how that then refers to the dolphins. So are there some situations or categories where you think these vocalizations are basically almost like laughter in human that patients couldn't pretend to do, right? Or are there others that are just loosely connected to emotions?
I'm sure there are. The only call type that we can say, and it's not even for certain, are innate in dolphins are echolocation clicks because they're sensory modality. However, they can even learn to shape those. They can change the envelope of the click. They can change the peak frequency of where the energy is distributed in the click. Their melon, they actually have so many muscles around their melon, they can shape the direction or not of the click. So again, it's this kind of extra filter layer of where they're pointing things. In terms of whistles, we assume they're innate in terms of production, but it's actually difficult to say that any of them are a biologically present call type, if that makes sense. So it's a really hard one to tease apart. As I say, my candidates for more emotionally tied ones would be the flat and decreasing ones, just because we see them in more high arousal situations. So those would be my candidates for looking at vocalizations that are possibly more innately driven. But then you could say the same for the increasing call type. You see that in play. Do we see it in the agonistic scenario because they're trying to placate someone who's being aggressive to them, so they produce a positive signal to be like, oh, I'm friendly, don't worry about it, but still get bitten anyway?
Liars.
Yeah, right? So yeah, it's a difficult one to get at, and not many studies have actually looked at this in dolphins yet. A lot of the welfare stuff has been at physiological or behavioral indicators of welfare, so stereotypy around enclosures and things, and some of them are just ignored vocalizations altogether. So yeah, I feel like we're trying to tease that apart, and I'd love to be able to answer that one day, but maybe we're not quite there to be like these ones. It'd be interesting to look at newborns for that, but again, facilities very protective of their newborns, rightly so. And in the wild, it's very difficult to get a long-term data set, because even over the first month, they'll start developing their signature whistle. So if you're not there every single day following the pod night and day, then you likely miss some very key steps in vocal development. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's all right.
Are there any more questions on
I think there's one coming in.
Oh,
Somebody's typing, but if it's not ready, maybe we can take another from the room.
yeah, do that.
I wonder whether you can help me with one thing.
yeah.
So, remember the slide you had there with the dog and the 3 states, one growling. When I play with my dog, sometimes, depending on the game,
Yeah.
he growls.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a negative emotion, right? But it's in a play context. How am I supposed to interpret that?
Well, I think vocalizations, so perhaps those were bad general examples of, but there are play growls, right? And I think I was at the comparative cognition conference. There was quite a lot of dog work actually, and some of them are on vocalizations where actually humans are quite good at telling apart aggressive growls from play growls from other contextual ones. So whilst they don't quite have the range of vocal learners in terms of acquiring new sounds, that doesn't mean within a growl that other forces can't come in, like amplitude and such, and being paired with baring teeth and tail tucked under, hackles up as well, right? So there's lots of contextual clues added to that, I think. I know we have a dog expert present who might like to confirm or deny what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. People can tell barks as well. You can play back barks to people who have dogs, and they
Yeah.
can tell if it's a positive situation that dog is in or
Yeah.
a negative one. Same with growling. There's
Okay.
as well. I try with Rottweiler because their growls sound the same to me across to other breeds. Yeah.
So yeah, I think pulling out one, and perhaps I was too broad in that stroke of being growls are only aggressive.
I didn't mean it. That's
No.
okay.
Yeah.
I see the-
But yeah, I think a lot of emotion is contextual in a lot of animals, right? Yeah.
Maybe I can ask a brief follow-on on
Yeah.
that one. Are there any differences in facial expression in the dolphins when they're playing?
They have no facial muscles.
They have no facial muscles. Oh wow, okay.
Or they might have a few,
Can they
but
hold their mouth open? Look, so like the play
sorry,
with
yes.
most mammals is just to drop the jaw, right? So it's
Yeah, it's difficult. We try. Facial cues are a lot more difficult in dolphins. Yes, the smile of a dolphin is so deceptive, given media and growing up with Flipper and all of that kind of stuff as well. That showing teeth is also a sign of aggression because they'll come and rake the body. Sometimes you'll turn up at the facility or you see a dolphin in the wild and it'll have fresh rake marks down it. Sometimes it's play because they're going to mouth an object, that kind of thing. Again, it's contextual and you're using more of, I think, the entire body to assess their kind of behavior in that sense. But yeah, face cues is not something we use a lot in determining this, especially when you're on top of a rock and you're trying to look down and you kind of just have more broad categories to go for, yeah.
You mentioned Flipper, but
Yeah.
I was wondering if fiction writers love imagining dolphins and relationships with dolphins, and it's usually children who have a great intuition and are able to understand things within a fictional context. Do you have any examples of any fiction that's got something right? Or, in a way, asked a question that's useful for what you do?
It's difficult because I'm just trying to get better at reading outside of work. So no, I've not come across many particular examples. Even non-fiction gets it wrong in the other way sometimes. Depending where you go, dolphins will have this kind of magical appearance around them. In other places, they'll be demonized, like there's some populations in Brazil and such that don't have a great relationship with river dolphins. Consent doesn't exist in the dolphin world, so they have even been seen to go and just mob sharks and kill them for seemingly no reason, right? So yeah, it's a pretty, depending where you go, you'll have a different reputation for them. But that doesn't negate that some people do form partnerships, especially fishing ones. There's some examples all the way around the world of fishermen forming relationships with dolphins and they learn cues from each other. So I think there's a population in Asia, they'll herd fish towards fishermen and then they'll give them a certain cue with their fluke and then the fishermen know to throw the fish out and then they both benefit. And we even have examples of that in Roman times. There's mosaics existing from Roman times of them having partnerships with dolphins as well. So yes, it is romanticized. Yes, they're also vilified in different parts of the world as well. But fantasy dolphins, I've not seen yet. Yeah.
Questions come through.
All right.
Yep, another one for you, Tom. Rebecca Boys and colleagues have proposed that the welfare of stranded cetaceans might be assessed through vocalizations. Could your work feed into this context? would you expect your findings to generalize at all to other delphinids?
I wouldn't be surprised. It's difficult to generalize to other delphinids because of the vocal learning aspect of things. Now, that being said, a lot of whistling cetaceans occupy a very similar frequency band. My supervisor, Julie Oswald, did a lot of work on short and long-beaked common dolphin and found mostly they're the same, but also found unique whistle types depending on the species as well. So there can be some crossover, but there can also be some differences. So I think we would need to do this separately for each species, especially because not all species are whistling and not all produce burst pulses. In terms of stranding, of course, we have Timmy, the whale, on our minds currently. If people have been paying attention to the news in Germany. Yeah, a stranded whale is in a pretty unhappy situation in the first place. So I don't know if monitoring vocalizations would tell us anything other than they're stressed, which I think should be fairly easy to understand. But depending on the level of stress, yes, I think the more measures we have, the better. Because as I said earlier, it's actually difficult to get real-time measurements of physiological stuff from cetaceans. So it would be great if that could be the case, but I don't think we can just go applying this to every species that we see without investigating it more first, purely because of the vocal learning aspect. We've shown it's consistent in this population, but is it in the dolphinarium in Rome? We would have to go and see. Yeah.
So you've mentioned that they don't display facial expressions, right? Because they don't really have many face muscles. But what about, are there any other behaviors that they display that could inform you about their affect or the valence? Like, for example, I'm thinking in rats, they can raise their fur, right? Piloerection,
Yeah.
usually associated with a negative stimulus.
Yeah.
In dolphins, do they, I don't know, move their flippers differently, or?
Yeah, they can do. I mean, especially when they're in affiliative context, they'll swim around touching each other with their fins, and you'll typically have a rubber and the one being rubbed. I think they call it a rubbie in the paper. So that's a sign of like socio-affiliation. Because they've adapted to live in water, a lot of the fur has gone. They still have some tiny hair around, but you can't see it. So a lot of those kind of standard mammalian physiological measures we'd look at, you just can't. So a lot of it is just more contextual in terms of, are they suddenly bolting away? Then probably something odd has gone on that spooked them. However, we also see them get the zoomies, right? I managed to put the zoomies in quotes in my PhD, which was a win for me. We'll see if we can get that in a paper. But yeah, right, so there are other behavioral correlates that we can see, but it is a bit more challenging, yeah.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Very cool stuff. I was just wondering whether it is usually assumed that vocalizations evolve because in a social context, or could it be just an expression of an individual by itself? And in regard to that, did you compare, for instance, within your play context, you have instances in which they play with objects, right?
Yeah.
Rather than play with specifics. Did you compare those rates?
I would like to. I didn't. Again, I didn't want to subdivide the data further, and the question around that we were funded to look at in this project was just, are play vocalizations found in other places? So, but I think that would be super interesting to look at. Are they playing by themselves? An anecdotal evidence or note I have, I suppose, is if they're playing by themselves, they are quieter, especially when like they're object playing. But if they're playing with others around, I would expect there to be more vocalizations. But we didn't look at that specifically. We just looked at play in general. And then your first bit was just whether it was
Yeah,
they're
it's
social,
like
so would they be
literature,
vocalizing?
But is it assumed that it is associated with social communication, vocalizations in general, or could it be that non-social species also do it for other reasons?
It is assumed that the more social a species is, the more vocal they might be. But that doesn't mean that, for example, sperm whales, they have their own dialects. However, the males just ponder off for like 5 years alone, and then they turn up back and they can still speak again. You think about solitary bull elephants as well, also vocal learners, despite spending a lot of time alone. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all that there is that correlation between vocal complexity and social complexity to navigate that, especially in a species like dolphins where sound is their primary sense. So they use it to communicate and they use it to sense the world around them as well. So I would expect them, there's an element there of they're primed perhaps to be a bit more vocal than other species in that sense as well, mixing with that sociality. Yeah, and like when a lot of species hear killer whale sounds, for example, which they have a really high frequency whistle, they'll just shut down and go quiet and just swim for a bit as a predatory avoidance kind of thing as well. So
Yeah, or but like for instance in birds, right? It could be more related rather than their complexity to a mating strategy. So
that's true. I mean, you think of sparrows, right? They're always together in flocks. They are limited vocal learners in the sense that they have a sensitive period, whereas starlings, right, also a small flock songbird, open-ended vocal learner, and can pretty much recreate any sound they hear. Amazing little birds. I always try and we have some in the garden. I'm like, I will get you to vocalize at some point. Never quite managed it. But the sparrows are a lot more constrained in the vocalizations that they can learn, right, in terms of it being, yeah.
Yeah, probably we have time for these two last questions. Amalia and Vicky.
May I ask about dolphin zoomies and what contexts you see that in? Because there's a lot of context in dogs, and it's usually related to emotional dysregulation or releasing of pressure in some way, like when dolphins do it.
Yeah, again, this is very anecdotal. I think I described it as bursts of high arousal, positive valence that can only be expressed through, I don't know, positive like movement. But we normally saw it in the younger one, Mia, a couple of times around feeding or being praised by some of the trainers. I think that's what made me think of zoomies as the first thing, is because it's a similar scenario that you'd see it in dogs as well. And it was not so erratic as you would find with when she'd been spooked and would swim away and then hide. You know, she was really like staying around you and like looping people who were like in the pool and such. So yeah, I don't think I managed to catch that on video, unfortunately.
I could be misremembering, but since these are observations from when the dolphins are showcasing the same behaviors, do you think observations for calls in contexts like positive, non-player, neutral would be different if you were looking at what they were doing individually, or when they were doing things differently?
Possibly, yeah. And that's a limitation of not being able to localize to individual with the hydrophone setup that we had. The fact, though, that we do see differences that are consistently repeated enough to show up to be significantly different, I think we would see those at the individual level as well, right? If you see a group of humans and they're all laughing, if you focus on the group or the individual, you'll still see that laugh behavior in response to the same stimuli. So I don't expect it to reveal anything too different, but it probably would reveal individual differences in timings and duration and perhaps how those vocalizations are made. Perhaps an increasing call for the old one was really steep, whereas for the younger one it was different perhaps. So maybe those are the things we could pull out instead, yeah.
Also, like if in these contexts, if they're all doing the same thing, if they're all doing different behaviors, do you think it would be different?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it depends how social they're being at the time. So sometimes you'd have two dolphins in the same pool, individually playing with their boys, in which case I'd still class it as the same behavior happening in that pool. And then sometimes you'd have two dolphins with boys swimming next to each other whilst touching, right? So there's that different level of sociality within the same behavior that probably would produce slightly different vocalizations, but it's a bit harder to tease apart in a more of a all-occurrence sampling effort such as this, yeah.
Lots more work for you to do, it sounds like.
Yeah. If anyone has some money.
Maybe someone online, we don't know.
Yeah.
Just internet, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, I think we're at the time
Yeah, just
as
about.
advertised. But there is coffee, there's cake, you have Tom's email, so please let the conversation continue. This has been really fascinating to enter
See if I
into the
can
world
get to that.
dolphin vocalizations. So let's just, one more time say thank you very much to the
Try and put my email up in case people want it.